A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Imagine you're a British soldier in North Africa during the Second World War. You have a broken truck, and you finally manage to scavenge a handful of bolts from a discarded American Jeep. You go to screw them in, and they just will not fit. The diameter is the same, the length is fine, but the pitch of the thread is just slightly off. It is a tiny technical mismatch that can leave an entire division stranded in the desert. Today's prompt from Daniel is about that invisible world of international standardization, looking at it as a constant tug-of-war between technical efficiency and national pride.
It is a classic problem, Corn, and it is one that has haunted engineers for centuries. My name is Herman Poppleberry, and I have spent way too many nights reading the dry, dusty histories of these technical committees. That screw thread issue you mentioned is actually the perfect entry point because it is so mundane yet so catastrophic. You had the British using the Whitworth thread, which dated back to 1841, and the Americans using their own standard. It was not until 1948, after the war was already over, that they finally sat down to create the Unified Thread Standard. We think of standardization as this dry, bureaucratic exercise, but it is really the codification of reality. It is how we agree on what a second is, what a meter is, and now how an artificial intelligence should be governed.
It feels like the ultimate test of a nation's ego. To adopt a standard, you have to admit that your way of doing things, even if you have done it for centuries, is less important than being able to talk to your neighbor. Daniel's prompt gets at this philosophical tension. When does a country decide that a measurement system or a currency is just a tool rather than a piece of their soul? It is the invisible infrastructure of the world, while your screw threads, your television signals, and your AI safety protocols are actually geopolitical battlegrounds.
That is exactly right. We crave global harmony because it makes trade easier and life safer, but every standard is a potential surrender of national identity. If you look at the big three of standardization, the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU, the International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, and the International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, you see the history of modern diplomacy written in technical specs. This is not just about bureaucracy, it is about who gets to define the rules of the game.
It is amazing that it took a technology like the telegraph to force that hand. Before we get into the modern AI wars, we have to look at how this started. The ITU is the oldest surviving international standards body, founded in 1865.
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Before 1865, if you wanted to send a telegraph from Paris to Berlin, the operator at the border literally had to transcribe the message from one system to another and hand it over. It was slow, error-prone, and expensive. The European nations realized that if they wanted a connected continent, they had to surrender some control over how their wires were strung and how their codes were sent. It was the birth of the International Telegraph Union. But the real heavyweight moment has to be the Metric Convention in 1875. That feels like the moment the world decided to stop guessing about the physical world.
The Treaty of the Meter was foundational. 17 nations signed it in Paris, and they created the BIPM, the International Bureau of Weights and Measures. What is fascinating is the branding. This was a French invention, born out of the French Revolution. A French priest named Gabriel Mouton had first proposed a universal decimal measurement system based on the dimensions of the Earth back in 1670. But to get the rest of the world on board, the French had to stop calling it a French meter.
They framed it as nature's own measurement. They said it was a 10 millionth of the distance from the equator to the North Pole. It was not French, it was universal. That rebranding is what allowed other sovereign nations to sign on without feeling like they were becoming French vassals. They even created a physical object, a hunk of platinum and iridium sitting in a vault in Sèvres, France, known as Le Grand K. For over a century, that was the kilogram. If someone dropped it, or if a microscopic amount of dust settled on it, the entire world's mass changed.
Yet, even with that universal framing, we still have the holdouts. I am looking at us, Herman. The United States, Liberia, and Myanmar. We are over 150 years past that treaty, and if I go to the hardware store here, I am still looking for a quarter-inch bolt, not a 6mm one. Why has the US been so resistant to the SI system?
It is a mix of massive industrial inertia and a very specific type of cultural identity. Congress actually passed the Metric Conversion Act in 1975, but they made it voluntary. And in a democracy, voluntary is often another word for never. Think about the sheer cost of changing every road sign, every machine tool, and every cookbook in a country of 300 million people. But there is also a deeper psychological resistance. People feel that the inch and the pound are grounded in human scale, while the meter feels clinical and foreign. It is one of the few areas where the United States has stubbornly refused to trade its legacy for global interoperability.
It is a contrast to the scientific world, though. We did a deep dive back in episode 734 about UTC and the chaos of time, and in that world the US is a leader in precision. Even the most patriotic American scientist is using the metric system because you cannot do modern physics without it.
And that brings us to the most incredible diplomatic achievement in modern science, which was the 2019 SI redefinition. In November of 2018, 60 countries voted unanimously to change the foundation of measurement. They moved away from physical objects like Le Grand K and tied the kilogram, the ampere, the Kelvin, and the mole to fundamental physical constants like the Planck constant and the Boltzmann constant. It is the ultimate standardization. We moved from a physical object that could be destroyed to a mathematical truth that is the same on Earth as it is on Mars.
It is a triumph of scientific diplomacy that happened almost entirely behind the scenes. No one was protesting in the streets about the Planck constant, but it changed the foundation of our technical world. But Herman, when you move away from pure science and into economics, the failures are much more common. Take the Latin monetary union.
This is a fascinating cautionary tale. It started in 1865, the same year as the ITU France, Belgium, Italy, and Switzerland tried to unify their currencies based on a gold and silver bimetallic standard. They wanted a world where you could spend a French franc in Rome or a Greek drachma in Brussels. It sounds like a 19th century version of the euro.
Why did it fall apart?
It lacked a central bank and a unified fiscal policy. Nations started cheating. They would debase their coinage or issue paper money that was not backed by the metal. Then the First World War hit, and the whole thing collapsed under the weight of national debt and military spending. It is a reminder that standardization requires more than just a technical agreement. It requires a level of political trust that most nations are not willing to maintain when things get difficult.
That trust is exactly what was missing during the Cold War, too. I was reading about the television color standards. You had NTSC in the US, and then Europe split between PAL and SECAM. That was not just a technical disagreement about how to encode color signals. It was a geopolitical strategy.
It was explicitly political. Charles de Gaulle was a huge proponent of SECAM, the French system. He wanted to protect French culture from American influence. By having a different technical standard, you create a walled garden. You make it harder for American films and broadcasts to just slide into your market. The Soviet Union eventually adopted SECAM for the same reason. They wanted to ensure their hardware and their content were distinct from the West. It is standardization used as a weapon of non-standardization.
It is fascinating how these technical committees become proxy battlegrounds for power. We saw this with the ISO country codes too. ISO 3166 seems like a simple list of two-letter codes, but the fight over who gets a code and what it is called is intense. Taiwan, Kosovo, even small island territories. If the ISO gives you a code, it is a form of digital recognition of your existence as a state. It is soft power in its purest form.
And that brings us right to the present day, March of 2026, where the stakes have moved from screw threads and television signals to the very logic of our artificial intelligence. We are currently in the middle of a massive tug of war between voluntary international standards and mandatory regional laws. Specifically, I am talking about ISO 42001 and the EUA I Act.
This is where it gets really messy. ISO 42001, which was published in December of 2023, is the first international standard for AI management systems. It is meant to be a global framework that companies can use to show they are being responsible. It is a consensus document built by experts from all over the world. But the European Union has its own ideas.
The EUA I Act is a different beast entirely. It is binding legislation. Its general purpose AI obligations took effect in August of 2025, and we are coming up on full enforcement by the Commission in August of this year, 2026. The problem is that while ISO 42001 is a global consensus document, it only overlaps with the EUA I Act by about 40 or 50%.
So, if I am a tech company in Silicon Valley or Tel Aviv, I can get ISO certified to show I am following international best practices. But that still might not be enough to keep me from getting fined by Brussels.
That is exactly the frustration. This is what scholars call the Brussels effect. The EU is so large and its regulations are so strict that they effectively become the global standard, regardless of what the ISO or the IEC says. We are seeing a shift from the old model of voluntary consensus to a model of mandatory regionalism. And in 2026, with the rise of economic nationalism, trade wars, and reshoring, many countries are starting to push back. They are asking why they should follow a standard that was essentially written in a committee room in Geneva or Brussels if it does not serve their specific national interests.
It feels like we are relearning the lesson of the telegraph. We want the world to be connected, but we are terrified of losing the ability to set our own rules. If you look at the big three, they are under more pressure now than they have been in decades. They are trying to find a middle ground for things like AI safety, orbital debris, and quantum computing security.
And the stakes are so much higher now. If we cannot agree on a standard for AI safety, we are not just talking about a bolt that does not fit. We are talking about systems that could fail in ways that affect entire economies or security apparatuses. We saw how humans have this inherent obsession with order in episode 816, where we talked about the evolution from scrolls to SQL. But that order is always fragile. It is built on a series of handshakes that can be withdrawn at any time.
I think one of the most interesting angles is how these standards actually get written. It is not just scientists in lab coats. It is corporate lobbyists, government diplomats, and engineers all horse trading in hotel conference rooms. If you can get your company's patent baked into a global ISO standard, you've just won a massive economic victory without ever firing a shot. It is the ultimate long game.
It really is. Look at how China has become incredibly active in these standards bodies over the last decade. They realized that the West had written the rules for the 20th century, and they want to be the ones writing the rules for the 21st, especially in things like 5G and AI governance. Before a tariff is ever announced, there is usually a battle in a standards committee.
So, what does this mean for the average person or the average small business owner listening to this? Is this just something for the giants to worry about?
I do not think so. For one, if you are in any kind of tech or manufacturing, you have to realize that compliance is not the same as safety. You might be ISO 42001 compliant, but that is a framework, not a legal shield. You have to keep your eyes on the big three to see where the next trade wars are going to be fought. We are moving into an era where technical standards are the new borders.
It is also a reminder that our modern world is a minor miracle of international cooperation. The fact that I can take my phone to almost any country and it will find a signal and connect to a network is incredible. We take it for granted, but every time you plug a USB-C cable into a port, you are benefiting from thousands of hours of arguments between people who probably did not even speak the same native language.
It is the price we pay for a connected world. And as we move into more complex areas like AI and biotechnology, that bill is getting more expensive. We have to decide how much of our national identity we are willing to trade for the convenience of things just working. If we cannot agree on a standard for AI, what hope do we have for climate or orbital debris standards?
It is a delicate balance. We crave harmony, but we fear losing ourselves in the process. We started this conversation with a bolt in the desert and ended with the future of artificial intelligence. It is all the same struggle, just on a different scale. It is about the tension between technical efficiency and national sovereignty.
I am still holding out hope for a world where we can agree on the big things, even if we still argue about whether to measure our height in centimeters or inches. There is something human about that stubbornness, even if it is technically inefficient.
Spoken like a true nerd, Herman. I think that is a good place to leave it for today. We have explored the invisible infrastructure of the world, from Gabriel Mouton's first dream of a decimal system in the 17th century to the modern battles over AI governance in 2026.
It is a long arc, but a fascinating one. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us on track and ensuring our audio standards are top-notch.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. If you're finding these deep dives useful, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us reach more people who care about these technical nuances. Check the website for the archive and more details on the SI redefinition.
This has been My Weird Prompts.
See you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to us.